This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different Q's.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Now joining us in studio is Republican candidate for Hancock County Sheriff, Corey Bagley. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming in. We appreciate it. Corey, I know your story, but why don't you tell us about it?
Sure. When I was growing up, I knew that I wanted to be a police officer from a very young age. Grammar school, going into high school, attended Ellsworth High School, graduated, went to the University of Maine, Presque Isle, and I went for physical education, recreation with a minor in coaching. And I did that to have kind of like a backup plan in case law enforcement didn't work out. So I finished college. During that time, I came back and was applying for jobs for law enforcement. I sent out like over 60 applications throughout the state. At that point in time, law enforcement was a hard job to get into. You had to know people or keep applying to be able to get into those type of jobs. And so I applied, and Hancock County was one of the places. That was my second interview, and Chief Deputy at the time, Richard Bishop, offered me a position in the Hancock County Jail as a part-time corrections officer. I took that. I figured that was my step into law enforcement. So I worked part-time while I finished out college, and then I took a part-time deputy position with the sheriff's office and patrolled Swans Island for a summer. And then the following year, I was hired as a full-time patrol officer for the Hancock County Sheriff's Office. From there, I worked my way up through the ranks until 2023. I worked as a patrol officer. I worked as a DARE officer. I worked in the Maine Drug Enforcement Agency for 6 years as an agent. I worked 7 more as a supervisor for Maine Drug Enforcement. And then I came back into the patrol division, was promoted to lieutenant, and served that for 5 years, and then chief deputy. Currently, I'm at the Ellsworth Police Department as a detective there.
Wow, that's an incredible background in law enforcement.
It certainly is. How was it working on Swans Island? Did you have to take the ferry back and forth, or did you live on the island?
During that time, we lived on the island. During our time that we were working, we stayed right out there, and then on our days off, we could come off the island. So I had an apartment right out there. It was a different experience, something that I look back on, and I really appreciate my time out there because I got to meet a lot of nice people on the island and see a different way Hancock County is. It's very unique living on the islands. It was also during a time when Hurricane Gloria came through as well, so it was good to have somebody out there for any of the incidents that might have come up during that.
Well, now that you mentioned Swans Island, are you aware about the ferry situation where they may bring the ferry to the mainland?
Just at night, yes. And I think that would be a terrible mistake. While I was working out on Swans Island, one of the only situations where I had to have the ferry crew woken up and transport me and a prisoner back from the island to the mainland because the subject was intoxicated driving, crashed his truck, and then proceeded to fight with me. So he had to be transported back. So the ferry had to make the lone trip across. And I was the only person on the ferry besides my prisoner. Certain emergencies, I feel that the ferry needs to be on the island so people can get off if they need to.
We're going to be watching that. It's very interesting.
Jason Joyce, did you ever meet him out there? Jason Joyce was working on it.
Yeah. And Jason Joyce is a very reasonable voice out on that island and somebody well respected.
So what is your motivation for running for Hancock County Sheriff?
I feel that when I left the sheriff's office, I still had unfinished business there. And I'd like to be able to go back and make sure that the sheriff's office is running the way it should be and getting ready for the next group of sheriff's deputies to come in and take over. I feel we're at a very difficult time in our society, and I think we need to make sure that we have good leadership and good training for our officers and start building a relationship with the community that we serve.
So you've lived your whole life in Hancock County. You've raised your family there. You've built your career there. How does that shape your perspective on serving as sheriff?
I think it's important that when you live in the community you serve, you take pride in what you do. It's important to make sure that you build relationships with the community that you serve. You talk with the people. You find out what their issues are, what their concerns are, what issues they may have as far as on one side of the county. It may not be the same issues that someone has on the other side of the county. You have a lot of coastal communities in Hancock County, but northern part of Hancock County doesn't have those issues, so they may have something else that they're more concerned about. It's important to build that relationship with people, and that's why I feel that the sheriff's office and the sheriff should be someone who is willing to sit down and talk with people and have open discussions about what their needs are and what their concerns are.
As a realtor, I know firsthand that Hancock County has such a wide range of residents from seasonal to full-time.
It really does. Hancock County has around 56,000 people that live there year-round. And then during the summer, you figure that you're probably talking about 1 million people are driving through there, or seasonal residents that are staying there during the summer months. And you have a wide variety of calls that you may be called for, from the burglaries to the thefts, motor vehicle complaints, which are nonstop, especially since cell phones have come into play. You have your domestic calls. Some of the other calls we're seeing a lot more of over the last several years has been the gun complaints, and complaints that are a lot more violent than they've ever been. And the speeding complaints that we have, especially the towns that are kind of on the end of each county, those seem to be the ones that feel like they get neglected a little bit because they are at the end of the county, where the towns that are kind of in the middle, you have a deputy who's driving through them all the time to get somewhere else.
There's a lot of small towns there that don't have law enforcement.
That's correct. Right now, we have Gooseboro and Winter Harbor, who each have a police department. Then you have Bar Harbor, Mount Desert, Southwest Harbor, Ellsworth, and Bucksport. So all the other communities in Hancock County without law enforcement, except for the sheriff's office or the state police.
How many deputies are on the road daily in general?
Based on the schedule, sometimes it changes, but Hancock County is divided up into what they refer to as slots. So there's 3 slots. The sheriff's department takes care of 2 of those slots, and the state police take care of 1 of the slots. And then in the evening time, the same situation, but the slots may rotate on who's responsible for what slots.
If you're just tuning in, this is Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a discussion with Republican candidate for Hancock County Sheriff, Corey Bagley. I did just see it reported that Acadia National Park had a record-breaking month last month in August, busiest in decades.
Yes, it's a busy place. And you figure that everyone going to Acadia National Park is driving through Hancock County. And a lot of vehicles traveling Route 1A, Route 1, and down through Trenton and onto the island. So there's a lot of people in a small amount of space, and sometimes tempers get the best of people, and that's when we get called.
Well, let's talk about the drug crisis. You mentioned it, between guns and drug influx. We've had Brewer Police Chief Christopher Martin in here more than once. We've also had Sheriff Troy Morton. And it's really the same conversation that there's now cartel-linked fentanyl trafficking. There's the illegal Chinese marijuana grows. I don't know if you're seeing that in Hancock County. Recently in Rumford, we had the shootout that was reported, allegedly that they shot AR-15s at officers, and allegedly they're cartel gang members. I know you're in Ellsworth, but what are you seeing in Hancock County?
We're seeing the same type situation that Brewer is. We have a lot of fentanyl, meth, cocaine, heroin that's coming into the area, and it's all tied to gangs from out of state and out of the country that are coming to Maine to sell their product. Back when I first started in Maine Drug Enforcement, it was kind of at the height of the Oxycontin pill epidemic, and then heroin was coming into play because people couldn't afford the oxy pills. The prices were going so high. So heroin became the drug of choice. And at that time, we had a lot of people who were running to the city in Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, and picking the drugs up and bringing back and selling. Over time, the drug dealers and the drug gangs in those cities started realizing that there was a pretty good market up here. So what they've done is, instead of having the people come down to buy it, they're actually coming up here. And they send members of the gangs up here and set up shop in the back rooms of some of these people who are addicted and are willing to allow them to sell out of the back room for them to be able to have product themselves. And so we're seeing a lot more of that. And when you start bringing in gang members who are selling drugs, then they start bringing more guns. And things start getting a lot more dangerous with people who are buying, and for law enforcement, especially when you start doing search warrants or arresting people, you start encountering a lot more of these gang members up in this area.
Since Hancock has so much coastline, any of the drugs coming through boats?
There were several cases where we had people who were bringing in drugs into the area through the coast. It isn't as much as comes through on the highway, but there are situations where we've had drug interdictions on the coast, and there's been deals done out on boats. There's been drugs being dropped off and others picking them up on boats. So it's definitely an avenue for them to use as well. And now that the border's kind of shut down for the United States, there's a lot more chances that they're going to look at boats instead of the normal routes.
Do you cover that territory at all, or is that strictly the Marine Patrol?
We respond to the islands. So if there's something that happens on Swans Island or Islesboro, those islands, then we respond to that. Anything out on the water mostly falls under the Coast Guard or the Marine Patrol.
So speaking of drugs, let's talk about the jail. Obviously, in Penobscot County, we're expecting a new jail at some point because it's desperately needed. Penobscot County Jail has had to rent cells from other counties. Do you know if Hancock County has provided any of those cells?
I know Hancock County Jail has beds that they rent out to other counties. I don't know specifically if Penobscot County is there or not, but I know they do have inmates from other counties that are boarded there.
What's your vision for the jail? Do you have issues there like they do in Penobscot County?
Well, there's a lot of issues. First of all, the Hancock County Jail holds around 62 inmates. LD1 kind of made things a little more difficult for a lot of the county jails, putting a cap on what the counties can add to their tax burden for the taxpayers for each county, capping at 4%. The state has $20 million roughly that they split amongst 15 jails in the state. And there's a formula that they have that decides on what jails get what amount. And Hancock County's percentage is roughly 3%, and around $667,000 is what they get out of that $20 million pie. So that means that Hancock County has to come up with the remaining balance to be able to fund the jail and run its operations. And their average budget is around $3.7 million. All that is fine, but when you start having the state making a lot of unfunded mandates, telling the jails that they have to do certain things by staffing or licensing different things, that makes things a lot more difficult when they don't fund you for those. They just tell you have to have them. The Hancock County Jail has a great staff who has done a lot with less, but that's putting a lot more burden on those staff members, the jail administrator, the assistant jail administrator, the corrections officers. That's putting more responsibility on them, which drives to burnout. And so you're looking at employees that may not last as long as they could have if they would have had more staff or not as much responsibilities placed on them. One of the other issues that Hancock County is going to be facing in the next couple of years is that they're going to be building a new courthouse somewhere. I think they finally decided on a location. So in the next couple of years, they're going to be building a new courthouse. And that's not going to be located next to the jail. So now you have transport officers and corrections officers who are going to be taking prisoners and having to stay with prisoners at the courthouse during their trials or hearings. And so you're going to have to budget for those new positions. And 4% added onto the county taxpayers is not going to cover those positions. So that's going to be an issue that Hancock County is going to have to face moving forward.
Where's the location that they decided upon to put it? Because I recall there was a lot of pushback.
There was a lot of pushback for them putting the new courthouse on the Surrey Road, but they have now decided that it's going to be located off High Street, between High Street and Eastern Main Street.
So let me ask you this. Part of the staff that they do have at the jail, are they able to offer any kind of mental health there?
Yes, there is. There's mental health programs. The Hancock County Jail offers a lot of different programs, but there are mental health programs. There's also the ability for evaluations if needed. One of the other things that I really want to work on moving forward, if elected sheriff, would be to work on the mental health issues with our deputies, giving them more training in dealing with mental health issues, also working on getting a social worker to be able to be embedded with the sheriff's office. Ellsworth and Bar Harbor both have that program up and running. Ellsworth now has 2 social workers that are embedded with officers, traveling with them and handling situations that they can once they're deemed safe. And those programs seem to be working very well. And there's a lot of follow-up that can go into that as well that they can take care of, which would take that responsibility away from the deputy a little bit. So it frees up the deputy to be able to take care of other complaints, where the social worker is able to take care of the resources and helping the people talk to the people that they need to talk to. All that needs coordination. All that needs to be worked out as far as finances and having an organization that's willing to work with you. And some of the other programs that I'd like to initiate if elected sheriff would be programs that are in the jail that would involve inmates being able to go out and do some community service type programs, such as maybe shoveling out the fire hydrants in the winter, going with the fire department and helping them shovel out the fire hydrants, doing like community gardens, being able to grow some vegetables, maybe for the jail to cut down some of the costs for the jail for their food budget, picking up trash at the parks or on the side of the road.
Didn't they used to do that? It seems as though we've gotten away from that, right?
We have gotten away from that. And a lot of that is based on inmates and what their sentences are, whether they're pre-sentenced or post-sentenced. And if they're pre-sentenced, a lot of times they're not able to do those type programs. But if they've been sentenced, then that's when they can start earning good time. And that's when they start looking to be able to do those programs. But we don't have a lot of those because currently if they serve 9 months and a day, then they go to Department of Corrections. Anything less than 9 months and a day, then they would be in county jail. So, and one of the other programs that they used to have that I'm not really sure why it stopped, but was the deferred OUI program, which was basically a program for first-time OUI offenders. And instead of going to jail for the 48 hours that they were to serve, they would report to a local school or a church. Or
in paint, right?
Paint or fix things up and do whatever the school needed. The school, I mean, this obviously would be a program that was being planned way in advance. And so they would have a list and all the equipment and everything they needed to be able to do the work for that weekend. And it's usually done during the summer. So they would have basically free labor to be able to fix our schools and do what the schools needed, which would save the schools money, which would save the taxpayers money. So I feel it's a win-win. And it also would enable the first-time offenders not to spend the weekend in jail, but they would spend the weekend there working and doing things. And it was kind of a, do it again, you don't get this chance.
If you're just tuning in, this is Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a discussion with Republican candidate for Hancock County Sheriff, Corey Bagley.
So what's your opinion on cashless bail? We were talking to Chief Martin a few weeks ago when he was talking about catch and release, where they pull somebody over for the 5th time or the 14th time, that they were just in and out. What's your opinion on that?
I think the cashless bail has been a disaster. It's frustrating for an officer to go to a theft complaint or an assault and deal with somebody who is out on 10, 12, 15 sets of bail, and a lot of it for the same offenses. A lot of times these repeat offenders are being arrested, taken to the jail, and they're being released before the officer can have the report even typed. It's frustrating to see the same people being charged with the same things, and it's not affecting how they behave. They continue their behavior, whether it's stealing from a local store, Walmart, Shop and Save, or a resident. And we don't have an answer for it because we just keep going through the same thing. And obviously, something's got to give at some point. Now, that took effect back in 2021. And in 2024, they also took away the bail fee, which was $60. They removed that as well because they felt that that was also discrimination and it wasn't fair to the low-income people. And so they removed that from the bail as well. So now we have people who are charged with misdemeanor, Class E crimes, nonviolent, who don't have to pay anything to get bailed out. They just have basically a promise note that they'll appear in court. And a lot of times when these people go to court, they may have 15 charges against them now because they just kept getting released and no consequences for their actions. So when they go to court, the district attorney's office usually ends up working a plea agreement out. And so they may get found guilty for 2 of the convictions, and the other ones are all tossed out or dismissed. This year, they even tried to take away the charge of violation of bail, violation of conditional release, which means that someone who's out on bail, say they have conditions of no alcohol, no drugs, and they're caught with alcohol and drugs, you couldn't charge them with violation of conditional release any longer if they took that away. They felt that the system's overburdened because we have so many of those charges out there in the system, which is caused by cashless bail.
You know, just a few years ago, we were having catalytic converters stolen like crazy. And rather than going after the person or people or team that was doing it, they made the car dealers put the serial numbers on the converters, which means the cost of the cars went up a little bit because it took a little while. We had to buy the equipment. It just didn't make sense of going after the people who were doing it. Just raise the fees and try to stop them from doing it.
Sometimes you have to think of different ways to try to deter someone from wanting to steal something, and making it so those catalytic converters were identifiable and be able to trace them back. So when they sold them to one of the metal places, it could be traced back to the dealership and find out that it was stolen from a car. So that deterred people from doing that. Yes, that put an extra burden on the everyday people because now they have to pay more for those catalytic converters being stamped and having serial numbers. Sometimes you have to come up with other ways because obviously the current system of catch and release isn't working.
But if they were held accountable, then that may have worked.
If they were held accountable, that may have worked. And you also look at it that some people may not have 15 convictions for theft. They may only have 1 because they actually had to sit in jail for a little bit and pay for their crime.
Yeah, because some of these converters were over $2,000.
Not only the converters for the expense themselves, but also the replacement, the work being done on the vehicle. All those things cost a lot of money and aggravation. And I don't think they look at the victims as much as they should, because the victims are the ones that have to pay the price. They're ones that are losing merchandise from their stores. They're the ones that are losing it from their driveways or their backyard. And sometimes there's restitution, but most times they don't get it. And as an officer responding to these complaints, it's frustrating. You see someone victimized and you do what you can for them. You do everything you can to find out who did it. And then when you do catch them, you take them to jail, and then you still don't get closure because a lot of times they don't get compensation for it. And it's also very discouraging when, especially some of the big businesses, you talk about acceptable losses. When big businesses say that they lose so much through the course of a year, and they give you a dollar amount, and that's what they consider to be acceptable losses. That's frustrating to see that they're willing to accept that because there's so much aggravation to go through the court system. And
I don't think they have a choice.
I'll tell you, since I've been at Ellsworth Police Department, which is a different type of law enforcement considered from the sheriff's office, it's a different thing working in the city compared to the rural patrol. And I've seen a different way of doing things, which is great. But I didn't realize the amount of theft and stuff that we have to deal with on a daily basis at the police department. It's just nonstop every day, from the Walmarts or the Shop and Saves to the little convenience stores, just every day. And a lot of times it's the same people.
Tell us your role as a detective.
So as a detective, I handle mostly felony type cases, sex crimes. I do a lot of domestic violence follow-up cases. The everyday thefts, the misdemeanor type thefts, those are mostly the road officers that are doing those.
As you know, coming up in November, there is a referendum talking about yellow flag versus red flag. What's your take on that?
I believe the yellow flag process that we currently have, that has been in place since 2020, is a good system. It works. And they make some tweaks to it over the last couple of years, which has made it a little bit quicker to be able to go through the process. We've done several of them over the last couple of years, and I think the system works. The difference between what we have in place now, the yellow flag law, and what they're proposing in November for the red flag law is basically right now you need a law enforcement officer to kind of start the process. You have to take the person into protective custody. They have to have a medical examination, psychiatric type evaluation, and then everything's taken to the judge, and the judge makes the decision and tells you whether you can put a weapons restriction order on the subject. which then you serve the subject and then file with the court and go through the steps. The difference is the red flag law would enable family members or other parties to be able to petition the judge to be able to start the process for the weapons restriction order, which means that, for an example, domestic violence victim or someone who's had an argument with their spouse could then file paperwork to have a weapons restriction order taken out on her husband. And there's no basis for it as far as any threats or any signs of psychiatric behavior or anything. That's a very dangerous step to allow anybody to be able to kind of start that process and not have a medical evaluation done on the subject.
Thank you for listening to Part 1 with Republican candidate for Hancock County Sheriff Corey Bagley. Make sure to tune in to Part 2 tomorrow, September 21st at 6:30 a.m. on VOM, The Voice of Maine. You don't want to miss it.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.